Tasha Havercamp is the Director of Evangelization from St. Paul the Apostle Parish, and she wears lots of hats. That a lot falls under that umbrella. But she's done a ton of work at St. Paul's to establish a culture of small groups, and also has been really great of implementing the OCIA process, the Order of Christian Initiation, where you kind of meet people where they're at, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it all has to revolve around Easter Vigil, depending on who you have and when they're ready. So she's going to share with us a little of that.
All right, can you hear me? Is this on?
No.
I think so.
Is it?
No. Can you hear me? Okay, in the back? There we go. They went up. That's good. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us today, and it's good to be here. I talk a little bit about small groups and OCIA, and if I screw up and say RCIA, forgive me, because we're still learning this shift. But it's good to be with you all. Thanks, Ryan, for the introduction. I want to kind of ask everybody in this room a question, and if you could raise your hand in response to this question, but wait until I'm finished to describe it. How many of you in this room have experienced a small group setting where it was safe, you felt like you'd really be yourself, it was really Christocentric, like really focused around Jesus and maybe scripture and getting to know who Christ is in your life. You could be vulnerable, and you felt like you built good friendship with these people. How many here have experienced that? Raise your hand. Okay, look around the room. My guess is this is not the norm for the typical Catholic person in the pews. And our goal is really to change that, right? We want people to encounter safe spaces where they can come and belong and get to know people in Christian friendship, okay? So as we think about small groups, I think our tendency, particularly as church staff and people who are connected to the church, is to think about systematizing a process for small groups. And let me just say that we at St. Paul's have not perfected anything. It's still very messy. We just met this past week to try to figure out how we're going to do it again for next year. So we don't have it figured out. But I do want to say that as you think about small groups, I think it's more important to think less about the systematized approach and more about the organic and incarnational approach. And the reason this is hard is because it's messier, right? It's much more about people, it's much more about individuals and where they're at and what they need than it is about what are we going to run during Lent or what small group program is going to fit our parish. So as I say that, when we talk about small groups, a lot of times what's missed is the 1,000 steps before the small group gathered together. And when I talk about small groups, I'm talking about life groups. I would call these more life groups where it's life-on-life discipleship, in friendship, and in relationship with each other. And the way that that happens is the on-ramp to those groups is so much bigger than an advertisement in the bulletin. And it's actually a lot more complicated and messy. So one of the things that I think is important, if you could just close your eyes for a second, I want you to think about something. I want you to think about the person you're most deeply saddened that is not in faith right now. The person that if you could give anything to get them to be in friendship with Jesus, you would do it. If you could get anything to get that person to come back to Mass, you would do it. Now I want you to think about what it would take for that person to step into the room of a small group. What would it take? I think if we think about small groups, you can open your eyes, thank you for playing along. If we think about small groups from that perspective, instead of the strategic, systematic approach, we can take a different angle on it. So just a couple of things that have been super helpful from my perspective as we've been doing them. Think about the audience. Who's coming to you? Who do you have? I am often thinking about my wonderfully committed, devout father who has been Catholic his whole life, but who would probably never step in the door of a life group at my house. He's a very strong believer, but getting together in a circle in a house talking about faith is too much for him. So what would it take for him to step into that space? So at St. Paul, some of the things that we've done is had sort of handoffs into life groups, if that makes sense. What are some low entry, low threshold? I heard previously people talking about ways you can build trust that might drop people into an opportunity for a life group. Sometimes this might take years to accomplish. Sometimes it might take a year. It might not take that long, but what it's going to really take is relationship. And so even with OCIA, as we're talking about OCIA too, every person that is interested or that we want to reach out to gets a one-on-one meeting to the point that we can make it happen. And that one-on-one meeting usually happens in a coffee shop, maybe over a drink, maybe over lunch, but it's always about meeting one-on-one with somebody and saying, tell me your story and what are you about, and getting to know them. because we can't run groups if we don't know who our audience is, and at least they're not as effective. We also, whenever we're doing our groups of any kind, we try to look at an apprentice model where it's like, okay, we have our strong leaders who are leading the groups, but we're going to pull along 2 people or maybe another couple to experience this with us so that ultimately we can be training them in the process. So then in turn, in a year or 2 more, they can do the same thing. This is sort of an approach that we've taken. And so at St. Paul's, we have a lot of different opportunities for small group gatherings. Some of those groups don't even talk about Jesus or don't talk about faith in a night they meet. So we've run things like women and wine. It's not always around alcohol. Sorry. Women and wine, beer, and bonfire. But let's have low threshold hangouts where we can catch some people who would come, like my dad, to have a beer in a backyard. And then maybe in 2 years, we can invite him into a small group. So what opportunities do our churches have that help people who are really far out, that person that you thought of? What small group gatherings do we have that might draw them in? Okay? That's a first step. And some of those are just really low threshold and easy entry. Then a second step is something we call life groups, where it's really about life on life. If you look at small groups as sort of, my husband always likes to say, like a collegiate level courses, you have 100 level courses, 200 level courses, 300 level courses. Is our small group ministry in our churches aimed like that? Or is the only thing we're offering a 300 level course where we're studying the Acts of the Apostles without anything before that? Would that person that you were thinking about in your mind be ready for that? Probably not. And so what is our trajectory to some of our groups that do get a little bit deeper and are more lesson in scripture and study based? So things that are low threshold that can catch people and then move them through a process. One of the other pieces of this that I think is super important that we sometimes miss is that leadership is so important. None of us can do this by ourselves. How we're pulling people along beside us really matters. And so who is in your midst that is somebody that's ripe, that's faithful, that's available, that's teachable, that would want to be a part of this process and has a gift and a charism for facilitating a small group? Pull those people in. Might I suggest that the most effective small group ministry that we have is not big and grandiose, small and deep. If we spend 3 years meeting with a very small group of people, but we're going very deep and we're really discipling and training people to be missionary, I think the effectiveness is already shown to us in the gospel. This is the way that Jesus did it. He took a small group of 12 and he really lived life with them for 3 years. Sometimes I think it's safer to do the 6-week Bible study thing because we can come in and come out. We got to be comfortable with the mess, okay? In the same token, got to be comfortable with the mess. Let's take a look at OCIA because you want to talk about messy. St. Paul's has a really great, I know this isn't the case for every parish. I grew up in a small parish in the country that isn't exactly getting people coming to them wanting to be Catholic. Fortunately, right now, St. Paul's does have that going on because of things with the school that are happening and because it's a parish that tends to get people in and out. So OCIA is a busy part of our staff and of our reality. But there is not a one-size-fits-all program, you guys. It is never possible. I know that sometimes we're locked into that as staff. We don't have the capacity or the resources, but I'm in my 10th year of doing OCIA, now OCIA, and we've learned so much. And the most that I've learned is it's so imperfect. And that if you're really going to follow the Spirit, you have to be flexible and adaptable, which isn't always our strength, right? What that means is every person that is interested in becoming Catholic, one-on-one meeting. It's not a form, it's a sit down, let me hear your story, what's bringing you here, and what do you need? And then from there, we're setting up our programs from that. I'm getting flagged, so I'm going to let go. Thank you all for listening and pass it on to our next person.